Welcome to Connecting the Community podcast. I am your host, Marge Andre. I will be connecting you to people, organizations, and events that create community. I am creating this podcast in Richmond Hill, an eclectic and very culturally diverse community with lots of trees and streams and interesting people, just up the hill from Toronto. On this podcast, I will be talking with Tania Love. She is a visual artist and currently has an exhibit at the Richmond Hill Central Library. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today.
Oh, you are very welcome. I'm glad we have found the time to do this, have this conversation. Can you introduce yourself and what you're really all about as an artist?
Oh, that's a big question. My name's Tania Love, and I have actually been practicing as an artist for over 2 decades. I began my practice through studying at University of Guelph in the early 90s. And it was really at that time that I started thinking how I had a kind of an uncomfortable relationship with oil paints and acrylic paints. Thinking about when washing the brushes in the sink and what was going into our water stream. And it was really at that time I started thinking about how can I work differently. And so I had a curiosity that sparked the trajectory of my work over the last couple of decades. So I do work largely inspired by natural forms, the relationship with place and landscape, and how this connects with our consciousness.
Ooh, that is a very interesting answer. So, how did you come to have an exhibit at Richmond Hill? Because you're not from Richmond Hill.
No, I live downtown, but I actually came to exhibit through invitation of Annette Ispina.
Mm-hmm.
Hope I said that right. Yeah, Annette Ispina. So she and I met over a decade ago through a mutual friend. I was doing a little pop-up at our friend's house, Elisabeth Ludwig. And Annette came to the show, and so we connected quite some time ago and reconnected recently, and she invited me to exhibit. So I was glad to have this opportunity to present work.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to give a shout out to Annette. She's found some great artists to have exhibits at the library, and you are another one on your list of that. So thank you for that. Can you describe the exhibit?
Yeah, well, the space itself is very interesting. It's in the foyer at the Richmond Hill Central Branch, and the space comprises of three window case galleries. So they're approximately 10 feet wide and about 3, 4 feet deep. So the three window cases are in a long line, so that spans about 30 feet. And in each of the window cases, I created, well, this is earlier work, but I installed some cut paper works. The two flanking window cases reflect work that I started when I was on Toronto Island as an artist in residence. And they are created with sumi ink on a Japanese kozo paper in this kind of marbled technique that's called sumunagashi. And at that time that I created the work, I was really interested in the relationship to water and the patterns that I would discover daily in the sand. So that collection in the two flanking window case spaces are these circular cut paper forms that look a little bit like water bubbles or kind of people have even described them as the kind of imagery of pancakes once they're sizzled in a pan. They look like salt stains on the pavement. And interestingly, also, they look a lot like the cell forms in the body when you look at cell structures under a microscope. So I ended up calling that series cell structures. So they are cut paper. So there's a kind of translucency. And then in the middle case is a collection called Pathways. And they are three uh, long panels, average size 80 inches long by 29 inches wide. And those I painted with an iron-based sort of ink, which is actually the medium used for cyanotype. So it is light sensitive to expose and deepen the color with according to UV light. So I painted those by hand on this Swedish tracing paper. So the paper itself has a translucent quality, and the imagery reflects the cracks that I would observe in the pavements and the kind of roadways walking down the streets in Toronto. And those cracks in the pavement, which if we look, we will all be kind of familiar with. They're very organic shapes, and they really reminded me of river forms and kind of arterial pathways that run through the body. So that's the imagery and the inspiration. So there are these dark blue lines contrasted with the white translucent tracing paper and then selectively cut holes. So you can see a little bit when you're at the exhibition, you can see through both sides. You can see out to the trees in the distance through the glass front windows, or the other direction, you can see people huddled around the desks inside the library. So there's kind of an interesting relationship between the inside and outside when presenting in this space.
Woo. I think you've done a very good job of describing the exhibit and really having people, I've got to go and see what she has created. So, yeah, thank you for that. It is a very interesting exhibit, and I have looked at it. I've taken some photos of it and think, So, thank you for the explanation of it as well as a description of it. So, but this exhibit, you do other types of art as well, correct?
I do, I would say I'm multidisciplinary as an artist. I am a huge fan of paper. A lot of my work really centers around paper, though I also work on canvas and linen. A lot of the uh, substrates are natural, like paper, wood, linen, canvas, and then the actual medium itself spans different inks from plant-based inks, mineral and casein-based paints, charcoal that I've made, graphite drawings, and then wearable textiles as well. So quite a scope. Some of the work is dimensional in the sense that it's installed in spaces, and some of it sits uh, on the surface of a wall, so what we call two-dimensional. And then other works, as I mentioned, as they're wearable pieces.
Well, yes, you are multi-dimensional artist, so very good. I will be putting your website in the podcast notes and encourage everyone to look at it. I think everyone will be amazed and just, wow, beautiful stuff that you create. Both in the description of the exhibit and your other works, you mentioned that you are inspired by nature. I have art surrounding me. It's inspired by nature, but it is a lot different than yours. Yeah, can you really expand on this idea of how you are inspired by nature?
Yeah, I think it's both a sense that nature is around us, but nature is us. We're not separate. So my experience of nature is understanding my place in the world to some degree. And while I live in the city, um, which is, described as an urban kind of habitat, I think that the experience of nature is still present when we connect with the cycles of the sun and the moon and the way light can fall across a space and um, just opportunities, kind of as I described, walking down the street, the way these patterns form in, these human-made structures like a sidewalk, like a roadway, that they're exposed to the forces of nature, the contraction, the heat, and then they end up creating these patterns that reflect the natural patterns that we see around us. So I think it's both a kind of observation of place and situating myself within that place and understanding what that relationship is.
Woo, that is quite an in-depth answer. And I think you inspire people to really look when you're just out for that walk and in places where you think, no, I'm not in nature, to really look twice. So thank you for that.
I hope
But
so.
yeah, so but do you spend a lot of time in nature? Do you go for hikes? Do you kayak on the lake? Do you make opportunities to really get immersed in nature?
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely necessary for me to have those expansive experiences in many different ways. So in the summer, I'm a gardener. It's just so important to me to connect with the earth and grow my vegetables and watch the miracle of a seed grow into, a carrot, a beet. It's an incredible phenomenon. I also am a skier, cross-country skier. So in the winter, my days are much happier if I can get out on a trail and feel my lungs and hear the crack of the trees. So definitely, it's so important to engage in different ways and different seasons. And I have to say, I enjoy walking in the urban parks a little bit more in the winter because they're even more quiet. Not
Yes.
everybody ventures out.
Yes, exactly. And the snow is does muffle the sound as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is nice to walk in the winter wonderland. So that's good.
Mhm.
Actually, an artist friend asked me to ask you this question. Would you say that you are creating art more to express yourself or to inspire others?
Mhm. It's such an interesting question, and I think it's probably both. I think that um, artists generally are motivated by different things. Why we create? I think initially, I it's an opportunity for me to digest and listen to the world around me. It's essential to my being. So I create because I have to create. It's part of my makeup. It's part of the way I experience the world. So initially it's a way of interpreting and understanding my place in the world. So I start off creating because I'm curious about stuff. I and it needs to get expressed. So that becomes a starting place. But then I there's always I think every individual hopes to find some way of relating to the world. And as artists, or myself as an artist, I hope that my work does create an opportunity for dialogue and gives people an opportunity to find more peace, more quiet, more sense of connection with the world around them, become more curious. So it's the dual force of both my own curiosity and then extending that outward.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I do want to talk to you about your paints and your inks, and you have hinted at this, but a short time ago, I did a podcast and a workshop with a local artist who makes his inks out of local foraged materials. And I noted from your website that you too use these natural inks, and you have a whole little diagram of them. Quite impressive. Do you make them? And what was your inspiration again for using these natural inks? You said that you are concerned about the harmful effect of non-natural inks.
Mhm. Yeah, it started off as I kind of described. The initial impulse was this feeling while I was in university. washing my brushes and thinking, something is strange about this, and I want to work differently. So that initial curiosity I had, a couple of decades ago led me to keep thinking about different things that I could use. And it led me kind of on a trail of research, which, a couple of decades ago, it was really hard to find any information about alternatives. And also to say that this knowledge actually was there because prior to the invention of synthetic color, everything came from nature, plants, minerals, rocks. Not to say that all natural materials are harmless, because in the creation of a lot of pigments, there's a lot of backstory that's not so good. But for myself personally, it really gave me another way of understanding being on a walk, being in the natural world. I started seeing the world very differently as I started creating inks. And the very first ink I ever made was with the hulls of black walnuts. And it just seemed like such a miracle. It's really a delight and wonder. So partly it's motivated by that curiosity and to enter, again, as I said, just enter into relationship with the natural world.
Very nice.
And
So,
I think there's a sense of, well, sorry, just to add, connection between material and message or meaning. So sometimes I choose things because there's a relationship between the content of the work and the medium I'm working with.
hmm. So do you create all your inks, or can you purchase some of them?
Yeah, so for example, with the collection I'm showing at the Richmond Hill Library, the cell structures were created with sumi ink, which is a traditional Japanese ink made from burning a variety of wood. And so it's the soot that's collected from the burning of the wood and then bound with kind of like a vegetable-based binding agent. So the soot kind of coalesces. And that ink, that's what I used for the cell structures collection. So that is something I purchased and I didn't make. And it's interesting because that comes from such a long tradition of ink making. So yes, in that case, I purchased that. I largely make the inks when I'm working with textile, for silk screening, for painting on textiles, and for painting on um, linens, canvas. It's a casein-based paint, so that's often purchasing the pigments and the casein and mixing it. So it's a very different process, but interesting as well.
Is very interesting. Yeah. Now, so the art display at the library is is translucent, and you refer to that. I like the one with bubbles, or at least I call them bubbles. You mentioned cell structures, but I see them as bubbles. And you got holes in them, and it's the paper's translucent. So I'm assuming that light is a really important part of your art, correct?
Yes. So first, I like to say I like that reference to bubbles. I totally see what you're saying, and yeah, it is there too. And in terms of the reference to light, absolutely. And I think that awareness that light is actually both an element and a subject in my work has become more apparent to me. Over time, I think it was perhaps something that was unconsciously there. And over the last few years, I've really been recognizing that it's another element where, as in the case of installations, there's the light being able to pass through the work, but there's also the element where in certain installations where I'm in controlled lighting situation where I'm angling light, and so the shadows cast become a dimensional aspect of the the sculpture or the presentation experience. So the viewer can walk through it and experience kind of confronting shadow and light. And then in my drawings, my recent drawings in this past year, I've actually been really drawing light and shadows. So the subject itself has become light and shadow. And so I think it's, again, thinking about it as an element, but it's something that we perceive. It animates our attention. It animates our sense of, what time of day we're experiencing, how we experience the space around us, and our awareness itself, our moods.
Okay. You said some very interesting things. I'll sum it up by saying that doing art, looking at art is really seeing. So, yeah, that's you've described it so well. Now, you do a lot of different types of art. Is it like a progression for you, or do you do different types of art depending on how you feel or whatever?
Mhm. I think it's almost cyclical in some ways. For myself, having practiced for over a couple of decades, I notice how there are certain themes that keep kind of popping up. And so I kind of revisit their themes and particular phenomena that I'm quite attracted to that seems to kind of pop up. And if I look back in my notebooks and sketchbook, I'll have scribbled something down. And more recently, I might have scribbled something down that's related to that. And I think, wow, I was thinking about that 10 years ago. So there's definitely a cyclical aspect. And at the same time, there's a progression where, as I learn more things, the work evolves. And at the same time, the work that does evolve is also very related to the space, the landscape, the time. For example, I did an artist residency a couple of years ago, well, a year and a half ago in Southeast Poland. And the drawings I did there were very much related to the sense of place, history, the kind of reference to lace work, and all of the pigments I used for the drawings I collected from that local landscape, like rosebush, made ink, ground chalk, ground old bricks for pigments. So in that case, very specific to the place and the time, even though it's kind of revisiting a subject that was very interesting to me.
Ooh, okay. I'd like to see your work from Poland. That is quite interesting. You mentioned how you do art residencies, but you also teach. Can you talk about that?
Yes, so I have been offering a series of workshops, largely focused around natural dyes and creating, introducing people how they might use different plant materials for dyes and inks. Also drawing classes. And so there's in these workshops and teaching opportunities, as well as I teach yoga. So there's a kind of commingling of this attention to the world around us, passing on of knowledge, my own, but knowledge that I didn't invent, that it, came from people before me, traditions before me, sharing that forward, and an inquiry into why we work with these things, how we relate to the environment around us. And I find in doing the workshops and bringing people together in these different ways, I have a certain um, objective in teaching, but at the same time, really like to open the space for people to add their own knowledge as well. And so there's some really interesting dialogues that come out that circle around the subject and in the larger sense of it can expand to, gardening or the forests, or there's so many other subjects that come through the teaching practice. So it's really a rich experience.
Yes, it is. Now, you are teaching, offering a one day at the Richmond Hill Central Library, a workshop, January 25th. and I'm going to put the link into that. So it sounds like it will be an amazing actual workshop. But the description of this workshop says that the participants will learn about the background inspiration for your series, Cell Structures, have an opportunity to work with Japanese sumi ink. The class begins breathing exercises, and you'll learn the basics of holding a brush. So, anything you'd like to add to that description?
I think it's a great opportunity to come out to a workshop in January when we feel like things are a bit quiet and hibernating, and to get an opportunity to gather, look after the nervous system by calming our body with some breathing, being with people and sharing the energy of community, and learning a new skill, which is so stimulating for neural activity, and exploring the experience of the fluid and the unique properties of sumi ink that both can be dense, deep line work, as well as the kind of marbled, floaty qualities of of suspended pigment that I employed to create the sumi ink cell structures. So you'll get an insight into the secrets of how that body of work was created.
Whoa. Okay. You certainly have done a very good job of describing it. So yeah, I am going to be away then, or certainly
Oh,
you have
darn.
convinced me to come and enjoy that. But wow, it sounds amazing. So thank you for coming up to Richmond Hill with your art and then with this exhibit. Uh, I do end the podcast asking the same question of all guests. And I'm going to ask you to name something about the community, even though you don't live in it. So please name one thing you really like about this community.
It's been lovely to come up a couple of times to the gallery, and if it's just one word, it's I have to say dynamic. Yep, dynamic's the word. Creative huddling.
Hmm.
I see all these heads huddled over the desks, and either singularly or together in dialogue, people seem to come to the library with um, with a sense of enjoyment and in having a home, or a place where they can study, reflect, converse with each other. And I was just so impressed at how dynamic and how engaged the library space was to hold people's experiences together.
Whoa, thank you for reflecting on that. I walk in now to the library and I don't think about it. So I really appreciate your answer there. So thank you again for taking the time. Your description of everything was just absolutely amazing. I hope one day I do get to really meet you, but thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, for your thoughtful questions, and many thanks to the Richmond Hill Library and to Annette for inviting me to share my work and to share it with all those who come to visit the library.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I would very much appreciate you sharing this podcast. Please tune in next week as we continue to explore the community. Consider emailing me at Marj, M-A-R-J, at marjandre.com. I welcome suggestions for podcast guests. Stay well, stay connected.